Bonjour à tous. Good day, everyone. Michael, I just want to let you know we're about to start. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sickle Cell Awareness Day and to this particular conference. We're pleased to have you here. And without further ado, I'll invite Dr. Jude-Marie Sénat to come forth and open us up. Thank you.
We launched the Interdisciplinary Centre for Black Health in October 2021. A few weeks later, I received an email asking how the first Black center in Canada, the first research center in Canada, entirely dedicated to Black health, cannot have sickle cell disease in its research agenda. This email was from Bibatinga. Now I call her Biba. What Biba didn't know, just the week before, I was on phone with my friend Anson Saint-Fa, and we were talking about how we can collaborate to make one of his dreams real, which is to write a book about his condition. I met Anson Saint-Fa. We were in our last class in high school. And the first thing I want to tell about him is the fact that it was late. And we started the year in September. And I think we were at the beginning of November or maybe the end of October when he came to school. Then we became friends. He was one of the best reporter in one of the most important media in Haiti. And then we met again in Ottawa. But during the year, the academic year, Anson many times lost days, but I never knew why. And just before the pandemic, we were talking together with another friend, another classmate, and he explained to me why. And it was because he has sickle cell disease. I asked him if I can talk a little bit about this story, about his story. And I maybe will ask him to stand up and you can applaud Anson. Thank you, Anson. And thank you for accepting that I can say little words about this. And I was not someone to mobilize about sickle cell disease because I knew the condition, and there is no Haitian people from Haiti or people from Africa would not know at least a little bit about sickle cells. And last year, we made a first program. It was virtual. And when Biba and I spoke about the Sickle Cell Disease Awareness Day, we said, let's make something in person. And I'm really happy we are all of that people here. And I'm also really happy that in that collaboration with Sickle Cell Disease Association of Canada, we were able to make this possible and have people like Dr. Simpson, Dr. Pakale, Dr. Walhun, Dr. Jenny Howe, Jennifer Bryan, Dr. Omishore Dryden. And I think it is a good moment. But more importantly, during the year, we put together in place a research on blood donation, on barriers related to blood donation. And the center is playing its role. And now I can answer to Biba, I cannot see a research center on Black health with sickle cell disease absent. It is in our agenda. We are at the first beginning, and be sure we will continue to work on this until we are able to improve the condition of people with sickle cell disease. It is my pleasure to introduce my dear colleague, Dr. Martin Lagacé, who is the Associate Vice President Research, Promotion and Development at the University of Ottawa, in her opening remarks. Welcome, Dr. Lagacé.
Before I start my official speech, I really want to thank my colleague Jean-Marie Sénat. He has done incredible work over the last 2 years à travers le Centre Interdisciplinaire pour la santé des Noirs, à travers toutes les conférences. Est-ce qu'on peut l'applaudir? Can we applaud him? Oui. So greetings, ladies and gentlemen, très honorable sénatrice Jane Cordy, Madame Bimba Tinga, présidente de l'association Anémie Falciforme du Canada, avec qui j'ai eu le plaisir de converser un peu informellement et qui me rappelait que sa mère est une diplômée de la faculté d'éducation de l'Université d'Ottawa. Alors, bienvenue. Monsieur Joël Arden, également, député provincial Ottawa-Centre, chers distingués invités, chers collègues, chers amis, mesdames et messieurs, bonjour et bienvenue à vous toutes et à vous tous. C'est un grand plaisir pour moi de vous accueillir sur notre campus pour cette conférence programmée à l'occasion de la journée de sensibilisation à l'anémie falciforme. Permettez-moi tout d'abord, comme il est coutume de le faire, de rendre hommage au peuple algonquin, gardien traditionnel de la terre sur laquelle se situe l'Université d'Ottawa. Nous reconnaissons le lien sacré de longue date l'unissant ce territoire qui demeure non cédé. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. As mentioned, I'm really delighted to be with you today on behalf of Sylvain Charbonneau, Vice President, Research and Innovation, to launch this U-Ottawa-hosted event jointly organized by the Interdisciplinary Centre on Black Health and the Sickle Cell Disease Association of Canada. The conference aims to bring together researchers, policymakers, caregivers, patients, and community leaders to exchange on this life-threatening disease affecting thousands of Canadians and to mobilize knowledge for increasing awareness throughout the community at large. It is a testimony to Professor Jean-Marie Sénat's leadership at the helm of the center to have gathered today so many stakeholders to this important forum, including government officials, as well as national and provincial representatives of the Sickle Cell Disease Association from Alberta, British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. The Interdisciplinary Centre for Black Health's mission of informing public health policy and of bringing health disparities and gaps in care affecting Black communities to the forefront is fully aligned with the University of Ottawa's strategic research approach founded on the core values of relevance, equity, impact, and inclusion, as well as in the pursuit of excellence. L'anémie falciforme touche des communautés identifiées par la recherche comme étant bien moins desservies en matière de soins de santé. En diffusant le plus largement possible les avancées des connaissances scientifiques sur cette maladie encore trop peu connue, cette conférence contribue indéniablement par la mobilisation des connaissances à faire avancer la santé et le bien-être tout au long de la vie et à promouvoir une société canadienne plus juste, parce que plus équitable en matière de soins de santé. Je profite et je termine ce court discours, encore une fois, pour saluer l'ensemble du travail de recherche unique accompli par l'équipe du Centre interdisciplinaire sur la santé des Noirs, et ce, en moins de 2 ans. Le Centre est un espace de recherche et de formation de premier plan qui reflète l'excellence de la recherche développée au sein de notre université et qui contribue à améliorer la vie de toutes les Canadiennes et de tous les Canadiens. Je vous souhaite une excellente conférence. Malheureusement, je ne peux rester des vôtres tout l'après-midi, mais encore une fois, merci à l'équipe du Centre. Merci à vous tous et à vous toutes pour votre présence. Et je passe la parole à mon collègue, puis-je le dire, and friend, Jeune-Marie Sénat. Thank you.
Maybe it is important to note, like the center benefits a full support, I can say, from the research office at the University of Ottawa. It is now a pleasure to present. Usually people say, on Sickle Cell Disease, people say warrior, and I think she's really a warrior. And I think people from the let's call it the Sickle Cell Disease community in Canada, they really have a warrior to defend them. And I'm talking about the president of the Sickle Cell Disease Association of Canada. She's a parent of an adult living with sickle cell disease. She has a unique understanding of the needs of the families, but also children dealing with the disease. Je ne vais pas dire plus, mesdames et messieurs, je vous invite vraiment à applaudir Biba Tinga.
I'm short. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Honorable Senator Body, MPP Harden, Madame Lagacé, warriors, guerriers, guerrières. Before I start, I'm going to say something to you, very personal. Look at this flyer. You see all the people on the flyer? Look at their titles. Doctors. Look at my name. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical doctor. I didn't earn a PhD. And this morning I called my mom early in the morning, and I told her that today I was going to be on a podium speaking with people who are physicians and everything. And I told her that, and I'm going to do it from this university where she graduated with a PhD in 1988. My mother is the first woman to bring a non-medical PhD to Niger, my birth country. And my mom says to me, it's good, Biba, you've earned that. You've earned the PhD of life. It's been 35 years. 35 years of dealing with the most debilitating disease, the most painful disease that has killed so many people in our community. And for that, you are an expert by experience. So I'm very grateful for this podium today. Warriors, if you have sickle cell SS, sickle cell SC, sickle cell beta thalassemia, if you want, if you can, please stand up, please. If you are a caregiver, you care for somebody with sickle cell disease. If you have a child, if you have a partner with sickle cell disease, stand up. Thank you. And myself. And unfortunately and sadly, I would like to say, if you've lost a child with sickle cell disease, please stand up. And let us acknowledge today that some people are still here. I'm so sorry for your loss. And the pandemic is over, right? Now we get to come outside, now we get to meet in person. It's our first in-person activity since the pandemic. And during this pandemic, our community had to shelter more than any other one because they are very, vulnerable at risk. But at the same time, we were the most forgotten one. I can speak from experience that my son had to work for 60 days before he can get a medical leave and stay home. I saw people with asthma, with high blood pressure, given a medical leave to stay at home. He couldn't get it because they said sickle cell was not on the list. So we had to create our own system to protect him. His young brother had to drive him every day, and I took on going to the supermarket to buy his food. But he went to work. He wore a mask and he washed his hand for 60 days when nobody knew what could happen to him. I'm telling you this just to tell you about the state of sickle cell disease in Canada. Supportive care. If you have sickle cell disease and you live in Canada, you have two treatment options: hydroxyurea, which is a cancer drug, and blood. That's it. For the past 45 years, our community has left with only that: antibiotics, painkillers. And yet, when people go to seek care, they face a barrier, being called drug seekers or waiting for long hours in the ER before having access to care. So today, as we stand here, this is why we keep raising our voices, amplifying our voices to raise awareness about this disease and to let you know what our needs, so that together, all of us as Canadians, we can find a solution. We know what sickle cell disease is in Canada because we've had good support and strong allies. Thanks to the bill introduced by the dear Senator Cody, that I can now call Jean. The bill S211 became a law in December as I was becoming the president, December 2017, and we got it. That makes Canada the first ever country in the world to pass a law to recognize June 19 as Sickle Cell Awareness Day. Thank you, Senator Cody. But we have to continue the work that she has started. We have to continue on the same path because people are still suffering. To this day, we don't have enough research done. I'm so grateful for the work that Dr. Jude-Marie Senai is doing. And now we've had doctors like Dr. Dreden who came again on the board, and we are gonna continue to do more. We need data generated from the community to show the state of the care, the quality of the life. I really get very upset when people say that, oh, people are living longer now. Yes, but where is the quality of life? I'm stronger than my son sometimes. I have to pick him up from work every day. I have to help him sometimes for some stuff that he should be able to do for himself. Sometimes I wonder if the treatment is working. And unfortunately, we've been burying our kids under the age of 50. 50 is too young to die in Canada. It's too young to die in Canada. We gotta do better as Canadians. We have so many barriers. And I tell you today, we Canadians have to sit in very uncomfortable spaces together. We have to have very difficult conversations together so that we can fix this for ourselves. Because yes, sickle cell affects people coming from communities that are considered to be marginalized. But you know what? Now it can affect anybody. We have people with blue eyes and blonde hair having sickle cell. So we need to work as a community. You have my speech here in French or English. The one that went out to the community today, I would love for you to hear it. Today, you're gonna hear about the work that we've been doing with Dr. Smita Pachale, the first physician to come and hold our hand and say, I know what you need. You've been asking for the registry. I am gonna do it with you. And we got it done. We've started the National Registry for Sickle Cell Disease. You're gonna hear from Dr. Bryan. She's gonna talk about the ER. And you're gonna hear from Dr. Simpson, who is working every day to treat people with sickle cell disease. I want you to pay attention. And when you leave this room today, I want you to become an ally. Thank you.
The United Nations made this day Sickle Cell Disease Awareness Day, but Canada, as Biba said, was the first country taking a bill to make, voted a bill to make this day officially a National Awareness Day in Canada. And the person who introduced this bill was Senator Jane Cody. And it is my pleasure to introduce Senator Jane Cody.
I do have written notes, but before I start that, I just have to talk about Biba for a moment. She is definitely a sickle cell warrior. She's passionate and compassionate. She's caring. She's driven, always driven to make things better. And every time I'm at an event with her, she just keeps pushing and pushing and pushing. And that's what we need. And I'm proud to be with you here today, Biba, and I'm proud to call you a friend. And your mom was absolutely right. You are a doctor of life. Thank you for all you do. I would like to start by acknowledging that we're gathered here on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe nations. I'd also like to welcome everyone here today on this National Sickle Cell Awareness Day and express my gratitude to the Interdisciplinary Centre for Black Health and the Sickle Cell Disease Association of Canada for organizing this conference and inviting me here today. And it's wonderful that the sun is actually shining, because that's what it's like when we all get together to make things happen. I must say that it's wonderful to be able to be together in person after years of limited contact and virtual gatherings. Nothing can replace the sense of community that you get when you have people in the room. And as I was saying to people earlier today, it's not just listening to people who are speaking. It's going for coffee and standing and talking to people and hearing their experiences. And that's where I think I've learned most, is just by listening and talking to people and hearing the story. I'm a senator from Nova Scotia, and my journey with the sickle cell community began almost 10 years ago with an information breakfast for parliamentarians on Parliament Hill, hosted by the Sickle Cell Association of Canada and Member of Parliament Kirsty Duncan of Toronto. And I'll say that prior to that breakfast, I had not heard of sickle cell disease. The people that I met that morning 10 years ago and the heartbreaking stories that were shared were so passionate and touched me, so that I was motivated by the end of that breakfast to help in any way that I could. And that was the beginning of my relationship with the Canadian Association. At that time, Lonray Tunji Ajay was the president. And today, I am so lucky to be working with Biba Tinga, Dr. Biba Tinga. As I said earlier, she's one of the most passionate, the most hardworking people that I know. Biba is making a huge difference in educating Canadians about sickle cell disease. When they first came to Ottawa, the National Sickle Cell Association wasn't only looking to educate people and parliamentarians about sickle cell, they were also hoping to find allies on Parliament Hill to work in helping to educate Canadians and to raise awareness of sickle cell disease across the country. The idea was to follow the lead of the United Nations General Assembly's resolution that declared sickle cell disease as a global health concern. It designated June 19th as the official day to raise awareness about the disease worldwide. I introduced, as Biba said earlier, I introduced a Made in Canada approach to recognize June 19th as National Sickle Cell Awareness Day in Canada in the Senate in the spring of 2015. A federal election was called not long after that, which, as we say on Parliament Hill, it killed the bill. The bill was no more. But when we were called back after the election, I introduced the bill again in the fall of 2015. Over the next 2 years, our bill slowly worked its way through Parliament, but finally, in the fall of 2017, 2 years later, it became law. And I have to tell you, sometimes I would be shaking my head, talking to parliamentarians in the Senate and the House of Commons, saying, like, this bill isn't that difficult. Let's get it passed. But that's the way Ottawa works. I was encouraged by the speeches of my colleagues, and I am forever grateful to my fellow senators and MPs who unanimously supported the bill, particularly my own MP, Darren Fisher, who sponsored the bill in the House of Commons. And I have to tell you that usually when you have what we call a private member's bill, you're phoning the House of Commons saying, like, would you please sponsor my bill? Because it's a lot of work when you take on the job of sponsoring the bill, either in the Senate or the House of Commons. That day, my office got 5 phone calls 5 phone calls to say, could I please sponsor your bill? I hear it's going to be voted on. And when it comes to the House of Commons, can I have it? Darren luckily happened to be the first one to phone because he was my MP. So it would have been pretty hard to say no to him. So as you know, Canadians celebrated the first official National Sickle Cell Awareness Day in 2018. And as Biba said earlier, we were the first country to officially recognize Sickle Cell Awareness Day. I tell the story of this legislation for 2 reasons. One is to remind you that your outreach, your advocacy efforts, whether they're in your community, your local level of government, provincial government, or even the federal government, does have an impact. It makes a difference. If you're talking to people, all the women in my bridge group all know about sickle cell. My family all knows about sickle cell. And, you know, it's interesting because I'll have some of the people that I've spoken to just socially come up to me and say, I was out the other day and I heard somebody talking about sickle cell, and they said they joined in the conversation. And it's just the knowledge, like when people are aware of it, it makes a huge difference. The second thing to remember is progress can be slow, and at times it can be very frustrating, and at times there are setbacks. You think you've moved 5 steps forward, and then you're going back a little bit. But I feel that as a senator, I feel that trying to get legislation through. And sometimes when you're not within the system, it's even more daunting and more frustrating. But remember, the actions that you take, the speaking that you do affects change. And even the worthwhile causes take a long time. Distinguished guests, when it comes to the discussion of sickle cell awareness, particularly on Parliament Hill, I must acknowledge the great Jean Augustine. Some of you in the room may know her. In 1997, she was the first person to raise the issue of sickle cell on Parliament Hill. And to highlight how little sickle cell was known, the health minister at the time told Jean that he didn't know what sickle cell was. But to his credit, it was Alan Rock. Some of you may know Alan Rock. To his credit, a week later, he told Jean that he had gotten a briefing from his department on sickle cell disease. And it was MP Kirsty Duncan who helped to inform me about sickle cell. The conversation around sickle cell that started with Jean Augustine continues today. Last Wednesday, the Senate's African Canadian group hosted a parliamentary information breakfast, not like the one I attended 10 years ago. And the MPs and the senators I spoke to after last week's breakfast were affected in the same way that I was affected at the breakfast in 2013. So the number of allies on Parliament Hill are growing. And I am encouraged that the conversations will continue to happen. As I look around the room today and see all of us here together, I must add that I had the good fortune to attend the Sickle Cell Awareness Group of Ontario's annual Hope Gala and Awards ceremony on Saturday night. And after several years of galas being canceled, I was reminded that night of how strong and vibrant the sickle cell awareness community is becoming. And I see that strength here today. As I wrap up, I just want to express how grateful I am to everyone who is in this room today. You are helping to raise awareness of sickle cell. You're helping to share your knowledge, and you're helping to support one another. And I once again thank the Interdisciplinary Centre for Black Health and the Sickle Cell Disease Association of Canada for organizing this important event today on this Sickle Cell Awareness Day. We have come a long way since I started my journey with sickle cell awareness, but there is still a lot to do, as Biba said earlier. But when I see the people who were on Parliament Hill last Thursday, and in Toronto on Saturday night, and here at the University of Ottawa today, I know that we are blessed with advocates who share Biba's passion. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
In the US, there are an estimation of 30,000 people with cystic fibrosis, and an estimation about 90,000 people with sickle cell disease. But cystic fibrosis when cystic fibrosis received $3,000 of research, sickle cell disease received $800 in research. From foundation, so this is from public fund, from private foundation, when cystic fibrosis received $8,000, sickle cell disease received just $100. I was like very curious, and I tried to see the figures in Canada, and the gap is more important. So this is why it is important to continue to talk about research, and because without research, it is difficult to find the solutions. Maintenant, j'ai l'honneur de présenter quelqu'un, parce que dans ces événements-là, c'est extrêmement important qu'on entend les chercheurs, qu'on entend tous ceux qui sont concernés par la question en parler, mais c'est aussi important d'écouter des personnes qui vivent la condition de pouvoir en parler. Et j'ai le plaisir d'introduire M. Ulysse Guerrier, qui va venir vous témoigner, et j'aimerais vraiment un taux d'applaudissement pour lui.
Merci pour cette introduction. Bon après-midi, mesdames et messieurs. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ulysse Guerrier. A sickle cell warrior, meaning I live with sickle cell disease. Sickle cell disease is an inherited blood disorder that affects millions of people around the world. About 6,000, the statistic that we have, about 6,000 people that accesses services in Canada living with sickle cell disease. It's a long life illness. The condition causes severe pain, organ damage, even death. For those who don't know what sickle cell is, it's basically the shape of the red cell is abnormal. Instead of looking like an oval, it looks like a crescent or a banana. So when it goes to a vessel, it blocks. Oxygen doesn't go there to that region, and that region basically died, deprived of oxygen. That's essentially what sickle cell disease is. We have a few doctors here today that can explain in greater details what sickle cell is. Knowing what sickle cell is, the biology of it, it's all good. It's good information. We're in a university, and that's good knowledge to have. But what does sickle cell look like? That's the question. Most people, if you see me walking on the street, you would not know that I have sickle cell disease, right? Because it's invisible, it's internal. Everywhere we have blood, wherever blood circulates, we can have a crisis, meaning you can have pain in that region. I'm talking to you today, I'm in a lot of pain, but none of you guys will be able to know. And something ironic that happened, I started a crisis last night because of the change of the temperature from coming in outside to inside the hotel room. There was AC, and the cold, because I take off my clothes, and the cold got into my legs, and I started having a lot of pain. and I couldn't sleep. Sleep deprivation is not a good thing. It's not a good combination for recovery. So I had to take a lot of medication. Some of the medication that we take is opioids, strong opioids. And that gives us the stigma of being drug seekers or drug addicts, which is not true, but who gave us the prescription of those medication? The same people that call us drug seekers and drug addicts are the same people that give us the drugs. But we need those drugs. Without those drugs, we can't survive, we can't function. I would not be here today to talk to you if I didn't have those narcotics that I need to function. Let me kind of go back and tell you guys a little bit about myself. I was born with sickle cell disease. I was diagnosed at the age of 2. My parents are from Haiti. I'm from Haitian descent. I was born in Toronto, raised in Montreal. I was born in the 70s. In Canada, we considered to be industrialized country, one of the biggest country in the world. And guess what? I was not diagnosed in Canada. My parents went to Haiti on vacation, and that's how I got a crisis and I got diagnosed in what we call a third world country. How is that possible? How does that make sense? That Haiti or anywhere in Africa or in the Caribbean or South America, they know what sickle cell is, and in Canada, we didn't know what sickle cell is in the 70s. We all have the same information. Why is that? I lost one of my older sisters to sickle cell disease when she was 7 months old. It was devastating loss to my family. Because of it, my mother was very even overprotective of me, because when my sister passed away due to sickle cell disease, but we didn't know at the time, she saw the same signs in me growing up. Coming up as a baby, I was crying all the time. She couldn't, make me stop crying. And I didn't, like the general growth of a baby, I didn't achieve that in the time that we were supposed to achieve those things. So she saw signs of my sister's illness in me, and she kept going to the hospital, asking the doctors, what's wrong with my baby? What's wrong with my child? And they gave me all kind of diagnosis, misdiagnosis, and they couldn't find what sickle cell was, but they couldn't find what was the issue. And like I was saying earlier, I was diagnosed in Haiti by Dr. Yvette Boni. For those who know who Dr. Yvette Boni is, she's a very renowned doctor, hematologist from Haiti that migrated to Quebec, Montreal, Quebec. And she was the doctor that diagnosed me there, and she became my doctor when we moved back to Montreal. And she was like a second mother to me. And due to her good care, I'm here today. Because in those times, there was little information about sickle cell, and she was a trailblazer, an advocate for sickle cell disease. And even though she retired today, we're still celebrating her, at the gala, was Saturday? Yeah, at the gala Saturday, we gave homage to Dr. Yvette Boni. She did tremendous work. When I was 25 years old, I lost my younger brother to sickle cell disease. He was 23 at the time. 23. It's a very young age. 23 for somebody to die of sickle cell disease in Canada, it's shocking. And my brother passed away from what they call the silent stroke. And to diagnose silent stroke, you have to do an MRI of the brain. And thanks to the newborn screening, now we know we can detect if a baby, or even through the pregnancy, if somebody carried sickle cell. So having those scans done at a young age and continue doing those things helps to be able to establish what are the costs of treatment that we can do to help people with sickle cell. I'm talking about I was diagnosed in the 70s, and now we're in 2020, in the 2020 era. And the treatment for sickle cell disease is pretty much similar to what it was in the 70s. Doctor was talking about cystic fibrosis. Treatment for cystic fibrosis from the 80s, when we start hearing about it, to today, it's like night and day. There's a lot of changes, there's a lot of investment, there's a lot of research that's been put there. Why is it that two illnesses that are comparable in terms of numbers of the population, the people that it affects, one has resources and the other one doesn't? Asking you guys that question, why? Having sickle cell disease, I'm faced with a lot of mistreatment, misunderstanding from doctors, nurses who do not understand or do not want to understand how to take care of us, how to have empathy, how to care for a fellow human being. I also face racism, stigma. Sickle cell disease is often called invisible disease because you can't see what's happening inside. Whether or not I'm hemolyzing, what is my blood count? Sickle cell is constant, it's always there. I'm always in pain. And when people will acknowledge our pain, understand what our pain is. Recently, I was hospitalized for what was supposed to be what they call a routine surgery. I was to have a biopsy of my shin because complication due to sickle cell, my bone marrow is pushing against my bone and it pierced my bone and there's a hole in there and the bone marrow actually leaked out. This thing didn't happen overnight. It took about 10 years to get to that point. But from the beginning, I've been telling doctors, I'm having pain in my legs. I'm having pain in my legs. And, you know, is it your sickle cell? Is it your typical sickle cell pain? Pain is pain. It feels like pain. Like I cannot describe if it's the same, but it's similar, but it's pain. It's not normal that I'm having pain like this for over 10 years and you guys are not doing anything. So one of my doctor, which is one of the doctors that I have that was, that had compassion, care about his patient, whether you're black, white, yellow, he actually treated all of his patients the same. And he took it to heart and said, you know what, let me do all the tests that's possible and let's find out what it is. Did an MRI and they discovered that the bone marrow pierced my bone and then leaked out and created this mass that they see. But they didn't quite know what it was. It wasn't certain. And what they thought it was, it's something called osteomyelitis, which is an infection of the bone, which it wasn't, but that's what the doctor thought it was. So I was scheduled to do a surgery, which was supposed to be a biopsy, take a little sample of the growth to find out what it was. During the pre-assessment, went to talk to doctor because of COVID. Now we do a lot of medical appointment over the phone or via Zoom, whatever. So during the assessment, I'm talking to the doctor and I explained to the doctor what medication I'm taking. I'm taking what they call fentanyl, which is like a drug that has like, you know, the bad reputation of being the drug of choice for drug addicts. And I also take something called oxycodone, another drug, you know, poster drug for drug addiction. So I'm telling him, my history and everything. And I've told him, I have sickle cell, so I would like you guys to take care of me. Like, it's not like we're asking for special treatment, but I'm asking for consideration for my illness. So things that you do with the general population, you cannot do it the same thing with us because we are different. And they're always talking about patient-centered care. But when it's time to address patient-centered care, they don't address it. They don't do it. It's like, it's a word that sounds good, but you don't, like, you use it when it's valuable to you, but when it's time for you to use it for the patient itself, you guys don't do that. The doctors don't do that. So to make a long story short, so I told them, I need to be, to have special precaution. The operating room, I have to be warm at all times. If there's change of temperature, I can have a crisis while I'm doing the procedure. And we have to have blood ready in case I need blood. So thankfully I did a treatment before the procedure. And I requested to be able to stay overnight under supervision to make sure that everything's okay before I get discharged. And I also saw an anesthesiologist that came and, talk about your history, talk about the medication that you take. And I asked him for a request, which was, I want to see an anesthesiologist that I know, that I've seen before, that knows my history, that I'm comfortable with, because they know my history and they know me. Because of that, the treatment they will take care of me. They'll do that special, it's not special treatment, but they will take consideration of me. This doctor was offended, and he said, every doctor in the team are very capable of doing the job. You don't have to worry about it. Whoever is there, they'll take care of you. I said, that's not what I asked for. I just asked for a simple request, which is, I've been going to this hospital for over 25 years. I just need to have somebody that knows me on your team that could be there that day. Deny my request. The doctor that doing the surgeon doing the procedure, deny my request. So I did the procedure, thank God. The anesthesiologist that was there is somebody that actually know. She was the head of anesthesiology. And they wanted to give me something, it's like similar to epidural. So they give you a shot and then it numbs your lower part so that they can do the procedure so you won't feel the pain. So I said that I'm not comfortable with that procedure. I would rather get general anesthesia because I'm used to it. I've done it before and everything went well with that. We had to debate like over an hour for me to get general anesthesia. So they sent a fellow. I said, no, I want this. They sent a second doctor, a third doctor. And then the head anesthesiology came and then she recognized me. She said, oh, Mr. Guerrier, okay, so what seems to be a problem? Like, what's the back and forth? I said, well, I asked to be able to have general anesthesia because I'm comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with the other treatment that you guys proposing. And my case is very complicated. If there's something called like, 1 in a million, 1 in 1,000, 1 in whatever, I'm the one. It always happened. So why don't you consider that fact? So she said, okay, I know you, like, you would not be, you're not a difficult person with experience. I know you. So let's do what you asked for. We'll have general anesthesia. We'll have you to be comfortable. We'll give you pain meds. So she basically took care of me. What I asked for, which was simple to do in the first place, we were able to do that. After the surgery, I got discharged. Because I'm under anesthesia, so I'm not really 100% there. So I got discharged. I'm like, okay. I asked to stay overnight, and then so they denied. I'm not in the mood to fight. Let me just go home. So I went home. When the anesthesia wore off, the pain went through the roof. There's nothing that could do to decrease the pain a little bit. We had to rush to emerge. Went to emerge, get to the hospital, etc. So the surgeon, and so actually, like I called him. I said, like, I have to go back to the hospital because like the pain is out of control. And then so he said, go to emerge. So what I was trying to avoid, it's exactly what happened. So I ended up going to the hospital, going to emerge. I stay there for a month. For a month, guys, for something that's called simple normal procedure. So all this could have been avoided if they had just listened to me in the first place. And this is one of the biggest issues that we face, not being heard. So does any of you ever had like a broken bone? By show of hands, broken bone. Okay. Do you guys remember the pain that you felt? Do you guys remember the experience of being in a cast? The itchiness? Imagine that experience, you living that every day. And that pain is nothing compared to the pain that actually I go through. I broke bones before, and it doesn't even, like I actually broke a bone. I went to the hospital. They rushed to take care of me better than when I'm in a crisis. And I need urgent care right away. They took care of me faster with a broken bone than with a sickle cell crisis. So if you can imagine that type of pain, you go through that every day, and they have no solution for you. The only thing they can suggest is pain control. And that pain control is not even doing the best job. It's manageable, but it's not doing the best job. There's no cure, by the way, there's no cure. So the financial burden of living with sickle cell disease can also be immense. Treatment and medication can be expensive, and many people living with sickle cell disease are unable to work due to the illness. The government hasn't considered sickle cell disease as a disability. No government funding for sickle cell organization. So as you guys can hear from my story, living with sickle cell disease is an heartbreaking experience. It's a daily battle. And that can take a toll physically, emotionally. So we're gonna watch a short clip. Michael? And when we come back, I have a serious question that I would want to ask each and every one of you. Just bear with him. Technology.
What are some of the challenges that you face because you have sickle cell? It's things that are hard.
Not believing I have sickle cell. Not believing I have pain, I guess.
Mm-hmm. What about like day to day? What's hard about just every day?
Well, I always have pain.
You always have pain every day?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how, for you, like, do you have a difficulty getting veins? Like, do you get poked a lot?
One time when I was in the hospital.
So for those who didn't hear properly, this is Sophie. She was 10 years old at the time. And she was essentially explaining that she lived with sickle cell disease. And she has pain all the time, every day. And when she speaks to the doctors, she's describing the type of pain that she has. She says that the pain moves. And the doctor look at her funny. What do you mean the pain moves? Well, everywhere you have blood circulating in your body, you can have pain. You can start, the pain could start in your shoulder, go to the arm, go to the left side, like, anywhere you have blood circulating, you can have a crisis. So this is Sophie. If Sophie was your child, what would you do? That's a question I'm asking every one of you. How far would you be willing to go to get someone like a doctor, nurse, to listen to her and to believe that she is in pain? Today is June 19, National Sickle Cell Awareness Day. I urge you to take a moment to think about those living with sickle cell disease, like Sophie, myself, and everybody that stood up today that has sickle cell disease. And there's many more in your communities. So would you ask, what can you do to help? You can help by raising awareness and support those affected by donating blood, give money. We all need money. And by volunteering for any sickle cell organization near you. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ulysse, for a powerful testimony. And I believe after hearing such a testimony, it's time to take a deep breath. And to help us do that, we welcome at this stage Lucie Demesmin, who's going to sing a song for us. We've heard her before. She's phenomenal. And please fasten your seatbelts. Lucie, please come.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm blind. Now I see 'twas grace that brought my heart to thee, and grace my fear relieved. How precious then that grace appeared, the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. This grace that brought me safe thus far, grace will bring me we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun.
At this stage, I'd like to call Dr. Idrissa Beogo, who's going to present the first panel. Dr. Beogo, please.
Good morning, everyone. Merci et bienvenue à cette conférence très informative et très instructive. On a assisté à beaucoup d'informations. Je vais essayer de courir pour rattraper le temps. We are short of time. I will try to do my best and faire en sorte que le panel se déroule dans le temps pour que vous puissiez poser énormément de questions. Pour ce faire, je me présente d'abord. My name is Idrissa and I am nurse by profession and I'm assistant professor in the School of Nursing in this university. Je vais commencer par présenter Dr. Simpson. Dr. Simpson est pédiatre, hématologiste de McGill. Et Dr. Simpson va nous présenter changing the face of sickle cell disease, the evolution of sickle cell disease therapy. So, elle va essayer de nous mettre en lumière les différentes thérapies qu'on observe actuellement, qui sont en cours actuellement. Vous savez que M. Guéry a tantôt parlé des différents aspects en lien avec le fait que le traitement, l'accès aux soins assez difficile, était quand même difficile, s'améliore maintenant. Elle va nous présenter faire une présentation dans cette perspective-là. Deuxième présentatrice, Dr. Simpson peut peut-être, can you, yeah, okay. Please welcome Dr. Simpson. La deuxième personnalité que je voudrais présenter, Dr. Jude, as well as Dr. Biba already talked about her. Dr. Pakele is also another warrior. Comme Dr. Biba l'a dit, Dr. Biba, selon la sénatrice Cordy, elle fut celle-là qui a participé à mettre en place le registre. C'est très important pour les chercheurs. Les chercheurs qui sont dans la salle le savent très bien. Je voudrais que vous l'applaudissez beaucoup. We'll be talking, you know, contrairement à Guerrier, she is from the other side, giving care. And she tried to show how deep is the inequality in the access to care in our Canadian system. Je ne sais pas s'il y a d'autres parce que je n'avais pas la même présentation. Yeah, Dr. Brian. Sorry. Dr. Brian. Where's Dr. Brian? Dr. Brian will talk about the registry. And comme je vous le disais tantôt, registry is very important for, please sit down, for researchers, as well for also general population to know how, comment est-ce que la maladie évolue, c'est quoi les caractéristiques, qui est concerné, etc., etc. Elle va essayer de nous mettre en lumière, en perspective, tous ces aspects-là. And please, you are welcome to pose any sort of question. Je vous laisse la parole. We can start, Dr. Simpson.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much to the organizing committee for having me here this afternoon to speak to you a little bit about the changing face of sickle cell disease and the evolution of therapies. Doesn't seem to be working. I have to point this way? Ah, okay, all right, thank you. So I wanted to start with a brief land acknowledgement, and it's with humble acknowledgements of the opportunity and responsibility with which I endeavor to serve the children and families of the unceded territories of the Anishinaabe-Algonquin region. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose, And so this is a brief presentation, but there are 3 objectives, and I'm hoping that by the end of the presentation, you'll have a better understanding of the basic biology and pathophysiology of sickle cell disease, that you'll be able to describe existing therapies as well as newer therapies that have come down the pipeline, and that you'll have a better ability to discuss the current and emerging curative therapies that are available for sickle cell disease. So I'll start with a brief overview just to make sure that we have the same foundation in terms of our understanding about sickle cell disease. And so to give a bit of history, it was in 1910 when a dental student from Grenada ended up at Chicago Presbyterian Hospital with symptoms of fatigue, pain, and pallor. And looking at his blood smear, which is demonstrated here on this slide, this was the first time that anyone had noted these serpentine or crescent-shaped blood cells with signs of anemia. And so this slide actually came from the first ever publication of sickle cell disease in the Western literature, which was published by James B. Herrick in 1910. So as a brief reminder, sickle cell anemia is caused by a single mutation that causes hemoglobin to combine into long rods, as you can see here in the slide. And these long rods will deform the red blood cell and cause it to break down, and also cause what we call vaso-occlusion, where we have blockage of blood vessels. And this is what ends up causing pain as well as damage to organs. So sickle cell disease is actually the most common inherited disease worldwide. And looking at newborns across the globe, approximately 400,000 infants are born with sickle cell disease each year. In African-born children, because they don't have access to comprehensive care, about 50 to 80% of those newborns or children will die by the age of 5. And this is largely related to infections. The best data that we have related to sickle cell disease in North America comes from the US, where they estimate that about 1 in every 600 African-American live births will be affected by sickle cell disease. In Canada, we currently don't have precise estimates of the incidence and prevalence of sickle cell disease. We estimate that there are about 6,000 affected individuals in this country. And based on OHIP data in Ontario, we estimate that there's a prevalence of about 1 in 2,800 children with sickle cell disease in this province. As you've heard, there are ongoing initiatives to establish patient registries, which are so important for us to have a better understanding of the condition and its natural course here in our Canadian context. With respect to the epidemiology across the globe, when we look at sickle cell disease, so in the map in yellow, that is the distribution of sickle cell disease across the globe. And you can see that although it predominantly affects Africa and the subcontinent, you can see that there are areas in Asia as well as in Europe where individuals are also affected by sickle cell disease. In the map below, this map represents the distribution of malaria across the globe, and you can see that there's a very clear overlap, which is likely related to the fact that sickle trait will confer protection against malaria. But knowing this, it's important to remember, and I always remind my patients of this, that sickle cell disease itself carries a more severe risk of malaria and can actually cause very significant disease with infection. So it's been alluded to already, but here in North America, sickle cell disease primarily affects the Black community, and this is because of the legacy of slavery on this continent and in this country. However, as I mentioned on the map, you'll see that sickle cell affects individuals of South Asian, from the Mediterranean, as well as individuals of mixed ethnicity. So as a clinician and as a teacher to learners in medicine, I always teach that when you see an individual presenting with extreme or unusual presentations of pain, sickle cell disease should always be your differential diagnosis. So when it comes to the spectrum of disease severity, the more S you have, the more severe disease you'll have. So individuals with sickle trait generally don't have manifestations of disease, but individuals with S beta 0 thalassemia and SS disease tend to have the most complications and the most frequent presentations. So this is one of my favorite slides. I don't think I ever do a presentation without showing this slide, but this slide basically shows the pathophysiology of sickle cell disease. And so we know that it involves the sickle crescent-shaped red cells that lead to vasoocclusion. However, there are other aspects of the condition that lead to the complications. So here we have a red cell that's undergoing hemolysis, where the red cell's breaking down. And in doing so, it releases hemoglobin that scavenges something called nitric oxide, which is a natural relaxant of blood vessels. So as a result, individuals with sickle cell disease end up having higher tone in their blood vessels and are at risk of something called pulmonary hypertension in the lung. Under low oxygen conditions, you have sickling of the red cells, which is irreversible. And that, as you can see in the image here, leads to blockage of your blood vessels, which prevents oxygen from being delivered beyond that point. One thing we often don't talk about or think about is the involvement of white blood cells in the pathophysiology of sickle cell disease, where these white blood cells actually lead to more adhesion and sticking in the blood vessels that leads to that blockage. So here in this diagram, these are different points at where we can try to target our therapies to try to mitigate or decrease the complications related to sickle cell disease. So as Mr. Guérin was saying, wherever blood flows, sickle cell goes. So sickle cell disease is a multi-organ disease that results in acute and long-term injury. So it can involve the lungs, the heart, the bones, the brain, the nervous system, the gastrointestinal tract, and you can have pain and complications involving any part of your body. With respect to the management of sickle cell disease, because of comprehensive care, we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. When we speak of comprehensive care, we refer to the specialized sickle cell clinics that we have in major cities across Canada. We also have aggressive pain management, which isn't optimal, where we see that in pediatric centers, we do our best, but many of our patients, once they transition, may experience more delays in their therapy. We also are aggressive vaccination to prevent infections and manage fever aggressively to prevent our individuals from sickle cell disease having severe infectious complications. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about disease modifying therapies. So I hope everybody here, most people here are aware of hydroxyurea, which is an old medication that was first described to improve outcomes of sickle cell disease about 50 years ago. But in Canada, we still don't have alternate therapies that are available to our patients. Chronic transfusions are options that we often offer to patients who don't have an ideal response to hydroxyurea or who have severe complications such as stroke or increased stroke risk. But there are novel therapies that have been approved in the United States that I'd like to talk about a little bit today. For curative therapies, there's bone marrow transplant as well as gene therapy that have become available. So as we've heard, the life expectancy of sickle cell disease has improved over time. And this graph comes from the CDC in the United States, where you can see the purple line, which represents the life expectancy for individuals with sickle cell disease, has improved and is approaching that of all Americans. However, this is not good enough. And this is because of limited therapies, social determinants of health, and inequities in care related to racism and other challenges that primarily affect individuals from Black and racialized communities. So for disease modifying therapies, again, back to this slide, we're able to target the different points that are highlighted here with the yellow circles. Hydroxyurea is a medication that actually targets all of these areas where you have an increase in fetal hemoglobin, which replaces the sickle hemoglobin to give healthy red cells. And as a result, you have less red cell breakdown or hemolysis, but you also decrease those white blood cells and that stickiness that leads to the vasoocclusion that I described. Another possible mechanism for hydroxyurea is by decreasing that increased tone I talked about in the blood vessel to reduce complications like pulmonary hypertension in individuals with sickle cell disease. So in talking about these different points of intervention, L-glutamine is a medication that helps to decrease the hemolysis that occurs with sickle cell disease. Anti-sickling agents are actually able to decrease that sickling and decrease that vasoocclusion that's caused by those irreversibly sickled red cells. And anti-endothelial therapies decrease the stickiness of those white blood cells that lead to vasoocclusion and perpetuate the complications related to sickle cell disease. So I don't have a lot of time left, but I wanted to talk about the different medications. Firstly, L-glutamine. So this is an amino acid that can be taken orally, and it's able to reduce the susceptibility of red cells to oxidative stress, which basically means high stress conditions where red blood cells tend to break down. So L-glutamine actually decreases that and also decreases that stickiness that leads to vaso-occlusion. So this is some data from a phase 3 clinical trial looking at L-glutamine, where there's a significant reduction in the pain crises, hospitalizations, time to first and second crises, and acute chest syndrome for individuals who were treated over 48 weeks. There was also a 25% reduction in the number of pain episodes. So this was seen as a very promising medication for our patients, and it's become available in the US. For anti-sickling agents, voxelotor or oxybrita is a medication that has become available, which actually decreases the tendency of red blood cells to form that crescent shape. And as a result, the red cells don't break down and you have less anemia and less polymerization or sickling related to the sickle mutation. In the HOPE phase 3 clinical trial, they looked at voxelotor compared to placebo, and they saw that patients had an increased hemoglobin. They had less red cell breakdown, but they did not see a difference in the incidence of pain over time. So this is a medication that's most helpful for individuals who have anemia as a primary presentation of their sickle cell disease, but it can be used in combination with other medications like hydroxyurea. So the next category of medications is anti-endothelial therapies. And a medication that's been approved from this class is something called crizanlizumab. So this is a medication that's given intravenously, and it's a monoclonal antibody that prevents adhesion or sticking to the red blood cell. So it decreases that vaso-occlusion and decreases pain episodes and similar complications. So this is a cartoon showing the vaso-occlusion that can occur with sickle cell disease. So you can see the gray cells there are representing white blood cells, and they're sticking to the red membrane or the blood vessel on the outer edges, and then sticking addition to the red cells that are sickling in the middle. So when you add crizanlizumab, you actually have antibodies that bind to that P-selectin protein that normally would cause the sticking of the white blood cells that leads to the vaso-occlusion, and you prevent that from happening. And so this has been shown to be effective in clinical trials. So the SUSTAIN trial was actually a phase 2 clinical trial that showed a 63% reduction in the rates of pain episodes in individuals who were treated with a high dose of crizanlizumab compared to placebo. They did have a lower dose group, which was not any different from placebo. But it's important to note that there were increased adverse events for individuals treated with crizanlizumab, but this is primarily nausea as well as some abdominal pain, and this was very treatable. So here, I just wanted to emphasize that although these novel therapies have become available, they're not available in Canada. So L-glutamine was approved by the FDA in July 2017. Voxelotor was approved in December 2021. Crizanlizumab was approved in December 2019. And for L-glutamine and Voxelotor, this is for all ages, pediatric and adult. And then for crizanlizumab, this is for individuals age 16 and over. When it comes to Canada, though, none of these have been approved, and we don't have a sense at all of the timeline for these medications to become available for our patients. When speaking of curative therapies, essentially there are two classes. So the first is stem cell transplantation. And so this cartoon just explains the steps that are involved, where you have a donor who is a match, usually a sibling, with a potential recipient, and then stem cells are collected, processed, and then the recipient patient will receive chemotherapy to enable them to accept the donor cells, which then will produce healthy red cells and replace their sickled blood cells. So now that we have good outcomes with stem cell therapy, where overall survival is more than 95%, the goals now are to reduce the complications. the effects that we don't want to have. So there are two major trials that are going on in Canada, the SUN trial, which looks at reduced chemotherapy for patients who are undergoing transplant, and then the Sickle MAID clinical trial that looks at using mismatched blood and mismatched blood donors for possible donation of stem cells. And these are going on in Alberta Children's Hospital and Sick Kids Hospital. So the next major category and novel therapy is gene therapy. And so there are two ways that this is done. Either the genes would be transferred using a virus that transfers a gene of interest. In the case of sickle cell disease, this is a normal beta globin to stem cells that are reinfused into the patient. Or there's gene editing, where there's an ability for the recipient to receive cells that contain CRISPR-Cas9 that are able to edit their endogenous cells so that they're able to produce normal beta globin to replace the sickle hemoglobin. So these therapies are very promising. And so this slide just comes from a patient, age 13, who was treated with gene therapy through a viral vector. And this was published in 2017. And the graph at the bottom just shows the gray line on the top of the bottom graph represents the total hemoglobin, which you can see increased significantly and was maintained for more than 15 months after the treatment. So this is a promising therapy. But again, gene therapy is only available to patients through a clinical trial. And that includes Canada, where even here at TOH, the Ottawa Hospital, they're opening a clinical trial looking at gene therapy for adult patients. However, for most individuals, they don't necessarily have access to a clinical trial. So here again, although we've made improvements, we have a lot of work to do so that we can try to narrow that gap and have optimal outcomes for individuals with sickle cell so they all have access to these novel therapies in Canada. So this means that we need ongoing advocacy and groups like this to help us to move the needle forward. So just a few take-home points. So firstly, sickle cell disease is the most common inherited disease worldwide. So there's no reason why sickle cell disease should not have the same amount of attention as cystic fibrosis. Comprehensive care has significantly improved life expectancy for individuals with sickle cell disease, but the truth is that in Canada, these comprehensive care centers tend to center in big urban centers. So that leaves a large community of individuals who may not in fact have access to the best possible care. In terms of medications and disease-modifying therapies, hydroxyurea is effective and it's safe, but there are other alternatives thanks to clinical trials where there are newer and effective options that will give better quality of life and overall health for our patients, but we have to advocate to have access to this here in Canada. So we need ongoing advocacy, ongoing clinical research, and continued pushing to improve access for effective therapies for sickle cell disease for our patients. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Simpson. Very, very informative. Technical, but very accessible. I would propose to go straight with Dr. Pakele and then Dr. Brian, and we can pose a question to our three panelists. Dr. Pakele, please.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing this, and thank you for inviting, for this presentation. It really means a lot. Sickle cell disease has many facets, and I would cover some of them and try not to reproduce what Dr. Simpson already covered. But most important points I want to cover is the healthcare inequity and the Canadian Sickle Cell Disease Registry that we have launched in April 2022. So first, I would like to acknowledge the traditional territories of Indigenous people that we live and work, and we pay respect and honor to the past and future generations. And I always say when I'm at the bridge that we are paying rent to the wrong owners. These are my disclosures because these are the funders for our research. So I would like to mention all of them, and they're all peer-reviewed funding, but otherwise there are no pertinent disclosures to my talk today. I would like to pay tribute. I work at the Community-Based Research Center, the Bridge, and we lost some members during COVID to the same inequities that we try to tackle at the Bridge through our research in the community, though we follow their legacy and try to walk in their shoes, carrying their dreams. So today I would like to focus on these learning objectives to learn about the inequities, highlight some of the clinical manifestation, but I would try not to reproduce what Dr. Simpson already covered eloquently, and to advocate for the urgent needs for policy change. And I'm glad our senator is still here intently taking notes. And to create the comprehensive clinical programs, they are still lacking. They're non-existent. And to introduce the first and only Canadian sickle cell disease registry through this presentation. As you know, there are a lot of definitions of health inequity, and this is one of those. However, what we need to focus on is justice and going beyond that equity. And that's what we are lacking in the world of sickle cell, is the justice. And that's what I would like to highlight, what it means for us to be inclusive and equitable and just. So the sickle cell disease, we know, is an inherited disease with a single mutation, but it affects mostly marginalized, racialized community globally, not just in US and Canada, but globally, the most marginalized communities are affected. I come from India, and the same is true. The lowest caste people are affected by the sickle cell disease. So the prevalences, these are estimated numbers from Canada, and I hope we learn more. But the one most important statistics is about 80% people living in Ontario are belonging to the lowest third income quintiles. So they are not just racialized, but they are impoverished and poor and marginalized. And we need to take that account when we are creating any kind of program affecting sickle cell. And Dr. Simpson covered this. It's how inherited disease and what kind of severity the disease trajectory has, and it's a global disease. So I come from India, as I said, though in the African continent and India, it's very, very common. And we see that those immigrated or brought as slaves in the countries like US and Canada, the disease remains in the most marginalized communities. Though discovered in 1949, the gene, the point mutation, we still do not have treatments, and the parallel disease, cystic fibrosis that we are talking about, has a magic cure now. And this is because of the awareness, the funding, the policy changes, the registry related data, and the knowledge that came out of it. And today we have a magic pill that actually cures cystic fibrosis. And we are far from there in terms of sickle cell. The pathophysiology beautifully described by Dr. Simpson, so I would not reiterate everything, but the blood vessels, as they are throughout your body, and the lived experience shared before tells you the symptoms are throughout your body. So the clinical course is relentless pain, the manifestation because of inflammation, swelling of the limbs, feet, even present in little kids, the acute chest syndrome. I am a lung doctor, so I would focus more on the lung, the acute chest syndrome, that common presentation in the emergency room, and the organ damage because blood vessels are throughout your body. So multi-organ disease, just like cystic fibrosis. And yet we have so much difference. It affects the pregnant women, and the manifestations are devastating. It limits the life, and people die prematurely. And life expectancy numbers are again the guesstimates, because we do not have a registry data, we do not have prevalence data, we do not have life expectancy data in Canada. These are all just estimates, and we need to stop estimating, and we need to have real data. So pain is very important, as we talked about, and pain is pain. Like earlier we heard, it has no first name or last name. It just hurts, and we need to listen to the patients, and we don't do that enough. lung manifestations, as I was saying, the acute chest syndrome, but I want you to take home this message that over 90% patients living with sickle cell has abnormal lung function. And we don't talk about it enough. And that abnormal lung function is an independent risk factor for dying early. And they relentlessly keep dropping lung function at much higher rate than the general population. And these, when your lung function is low, you cannot exercise enough, you cannot participate in your day-to-day activities enough, and your quality life is impoverished. So the acute chest syndrome is the commonest presentation in the emergency room when we see the sickle cell patients. So they present with chest crisis, pain in chest, different presentations, but many of our patients suffering from sickle cell also has asthma. And we need to understand the presentation of asthma, shortness of breath, wheezing, etc., and which is a hallmark sign of asthma. But many of the patients are not diagnosed with this kind of an entity, which is otherwise commonly known and can be easily diagnosed. But we do not have comprehensive centers with multidisciplinary specialists available at one site, and hence the diagnosis is delayed. And what leads to the delayed diagnosis, not just a more acute chest crisis. If your asthma is not diagnosed and not treated properly, you get more acute chest crisis and more drop in lung function, which is lifelong. So you keep paying the price. So the asthma and sickle cell disease story is still not fully known. I here have started my own sickle cell lung clinic, and this is it. My comprehensive clinical care is me, and when I see the cystic fibrosis clinic, we have a dedicated nurse, we have a dedicated social worker, we have a dedicated pharmacist, we have dedicated nutritionist, we have dedicated doctor, not just a lung doctor, but we have a diabetologist, we have an ENT specialist, we have gastroenterologist, and we do a comprehensive multidisciplinary care clinic for cystic fibrosis. Where is that for sickle cell? We don't have it. It's not existing. Hematologists are seeing their patient in hematology clinic. I am seeing my lung patients in my lung clinic. We do not have multidisciplinary comprehensive clinical care that is sorely lacking for sickle cell, not just in Canada, but also in United States, because the funding is very poor. But if you treat asthma in a sickle cell disease patient, their lung function improves. Their chances of going to the emergency room are reduced. Their chances of getting hospitalized are reduced because they get less acute chest crisis. And these statistics are very straightforward. And the disease is very similar to cystic fibrosis, inherited, multi-system, life-limiting, damaging multiple organs. But the difference in the resources and funding, what is available for the patients or for the research, is unbelievable. So the decline in lung function continues if you do not, similar to cystic fibrosis. During COVID-19, we heard in the beginning, we did not know, but then there was some effort and some people started collecting data and they learned what people like Biba already knew, that people with sickle cell do get more COVID-19, a severe disease, and they are more vulnerable to get that disease. And that was then known after some research was done. But people living with sickle cell already knew that, how vulnerable they are to get any infection. What's different with COVID-19? And that's what came out of the data. They have higher risk of hospitalization. And the treatments are limited, Dr. Simpson told, very limited. And even those treatments which are available just south of the border are not available in Canada. So I hope people like Senator, I don't want to put you on spot, but you have another bill on your desk waiting to happen to get these treatments approved in Canada, and unless people like you take on that task, it will never happen. We will not have those treatments already approved by FDA here in Canada. We need champions. Otherwise, people just have to take the blood transfusion, which is a very, very devastating kind of a treatment itself. It has more side effects. and people just have no other options. Penicillin prophylaxis work, but it's only possible in younger kids, and the older people, we have only option is hydroxyurea. And so on and on I can go. These are the treatments available. They are very expensive. They cost you a hand and a leg and a foot maybe, and they are not accessible to many. People living with sickle cell are poor. People living with sickle cell belong to the lowest socioeconomic strata. They do not have voice. And hence we have to join our combined voice to create the advanced treatments and make them available if they are available south of the border. And these kind of treatments, which are, organ related, like specific treatment for lungs, when they get obstructive lung disease, when they get all these sleep related diseases, pulmonary hypertension, we have no treatment available. We have no guidelines available. And we need to learn these diseases further and create treatment options and create guidelines how best to treat these, so that my other pulmonologists, colleagues know how to treat these people. And hence, and more research means more resources. We need more resources for research. Research doesn't happen without money. The asthma needs to be well treated, but we need those kind of a comprehensive multidisciplinary clinics that are existent for cystic fibrosis. We do not have them. And then only we'll be able to identify the asthma in sickle cell better, and we will be able to diagnose better and treat better and prevent the long-term lung complications. So these kind of treatments are, we know the pain crisis happen. We know they get organ damage. We know we can prevent so much, but we do not have those opportunities. We do not have those solutions available because of a lot of different things. How to reduce discrimination, how to reduce racism. If anybody has an idea, we can do a, spin-off company from U Ottawa. Because that's what we need to do, right? And there are financial and psychosocial burden, like earlier it was alluded to. We have a lot of angles to sickle cell management, and we do not have comprehensive solutions. We have profound healthcare gaps we were talking about in terms of people who are suffering from sickle cell, and thus we need more resources, more humanity to reduce the stigma, more humane solutions to reduce the stigma, because the stigma affects multifold their clinical care, their outcomes, their day-to-day life in the community, not just in the hospital. The stigma prevails everywhere. And I, whatever can say here with my hands in the air, Dr. Ogu has very eloquently stated how sickle cell patients are impacted by this discriminatory behavior of our society towards people, but also the neglect of sickle cell disease that we see through our. So where we go from here, we got increased funding. We need screening programs. We need registry. We need preventive therapies. We need health education. We need more of awareness events like this. We need to reduce the stigma. We need to increase allyship and collaborations. We need to promote and create the models of comprehensive multidisciplinary care, exactly like cystic fibrosis. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. We have the model. We just have to follow it. We need funding. We need people to follow that model, and we will be there. We already have a model. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. We do it so well in cystic fibrosis that we have come to a level that we have a magic pill now. They just take one pill and the cystic fibrosis is almost cured. Today's cystic fibrosis clinic doesn't look the same how it was even last year. And we have come to there not by accident, but by collective effort. And this graph was shown by Dr. Simpson, but I am wanting to tell you why that graph bent is because when the US did investment, money brought that graph to bend upwards, the life expectancy, So this is very important. So the multidisciplinary clinic works. They have shown to work in sickle cell and other places, but we have the formula from, cystic fibrosis. The transition of care is important. And that's where I come to registry, because cystic fibrosis has registry for donkey's years. They learned so much from the registry. And now that we have launched the registry, we want to use it for multiple of these aims so that we learn more and we catch up with with cystic fibrosis sooner than later. I wanted to show you just 1 minute clip of the registry, how it works, and it will have a, can you put play, please? Thank you. And it will have a simple interface where clinicians and nurses in the clinic will be able to enter the data when they see the patients after obtaining the consent. We will have the socio-demographics. We will have different questionnaires which will measure, the test and quality of life. We will have separate patient portal where patients can, input data, and we will learn much more from the input from the clinical team and all the patients, the people living with sickle cell, and we will have all these rich data from all the patients across Canada. And when we will, just tiny bit, and we'll have different languages, and we then can learn so much more from the sickle cell that we have model of cystic fibrosis with the registry from US and Canada and globally, and we will get there from the registry, starting here in Ottawa, going across Canada, and then globally, because we have the leaders like Biba, who actually is passionate and a warrior, not just warrior, she is the leader who will be inspiring all of us to get there.
Can I say something? Please. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting, Dr. Brad. Oops. I would like to say something about the registry, okay? So I'm going to share some personal information with you. In my other life, I used to work for Statistics Canada. And how I started to become a public servant is that I was doing data collections. And one of the things they taught me in my training is that every time the government of Canada takes a decision about healthcare, education, housing, it comes from that information that we collect. I went all the way to the Inuit land and I collected data. And I remember they told me that every single decision that the government of Canada will take for the next 5 years rely on the information that we bring. That's it. So the registry does the same for us. That's our tool to show the quality of the care, to show the quality of life, and to tell them what are our needs. And it's also the best tool for the physicians to treat us. I remember when my son was going to college, he was in Sudbury. There was no physician to treat sickle cell. Nobody. He had to come back and cut his studies short because there was nobody to care for him. If there was a registry, maybe there would be more knowledge and expertise and experience sharing to help the physician over there. So I want you, when you go home, you go to your senators, you go to your MPs, you go to your MPPs, and you tell them, in Canada, we need a national registry for sickle cell disease. What she started here, we have to expand it nationwide. We want a pan-Canadian one. We want the information to be reported so that we know it's going to bring clinical trials, it's going to bring the new drugs. And I'm very happy to say that the first pharma to support us in this registry is Pfizer. And Pfizer is here today, so we say thank you. Thank you. The first to believe in this project and support us financially. Others are coming on board, but we need multiple partners. We need the government to come and support, because you know what? We're Canadians. So they have the responsibility to give us that tool that we need. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much. And she's the first one, I don't know how many email and Zooms and phone calls, and in the middle of the night, anytime I text you, you call back, you explain things to me. And then we've been having multiple meetings, and it's gonna happen because now the Canadian hematologists also, CanHim, have come on board. We've had the first meetings, and they said, yes, we're gonna work on it. So my hope is by next year, if we come back, we're gonna just come and start reporting on the data that we've collected. Thank you.
Dr. Brian, you can go ahead.
Thank you. All right, and thank you so much to Biba, to Schwab, to the organizers for today. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here speaking with you on behalf of the University Health Network Emergency Department Sickle Cell Working Group. So I'm going to be speaking about the work of many people today. Oh, maybe I don't know how to do this. Did did something happen? Yes, okay. So I wanted to acknowledge the financial support that we've received from the University Health Network Physicians Council on Quality and Safety and the UHN Summer Research in Emergency Medicine Training Program. I'm mostly just guessing at the buttons. I'm also okay just to talk, that's fine. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I work. So I'm an emergency physician. I work at Toronto General Hospital, Toronto Western Hospital. At Toronto General Hospital is home to the largest red blood cell disorders clinic in Canada, maybe North America. And so we become the home emergency department for one of the largest populations of folks living with sickle cell in all of Canada. And this one here. Oh, thank you so much. All right. And as we've already heard, significant barriers to care in sickle cell that are amplified in the emergency department. And here I want to acknowledge my collaborators, and I'll speak a little bit more about them in a few moments. But I wanted to point out that this is a mix of emergency physicians, nurses, learners, sickle cell warriors, allied health, and that really nothing can move forward unless we're moving forward together, which I think has been the theme of what we've been hearing so far today. Now, many of you may have seen this article in the Canadian Medical Association Journal in 2020, and this featured my colleague and now friend, Ms. Serena Thompson, who is a sickle cell warrior. And she called out that her relationship with the emergency room is that there is no relationship at all. Right? As an emergency physician, I want people to feel comfortable coming into the emergency department. Ideally, I want people to not have to come to the emergency department, but when it happens, I want them to know that it's a safe place to come. And that really has not been the case for so many people, particularly adults living with sickle cell. Our emergency department in 2020 looked at ways of really taking an anti-racist stance as a department in a very practical way, and identified care of people living with sickle cell as a gap in our emergency department. And so we came together with our community organizations like the Sickle Cell Awareness Group of Ontario, the Sickle Cell Association of Ontario, with our nurses, department leads, with sickle cell warriors, with our social workers, with patient relations, with our hematology team and other representatives of the red blood cell disorders clinic to talk about what can we do to address some of these gaps. So what are we missing? What can we do better? And it was very clear that the number one target was about early adequate pain relief in the emergency department. And what we knew is that if we address pain early and well, that it leads to shorter stays in the emergency department and a lower likelihood of having to be admitted into the hospital. And so this was important to our sickle cell warriors. It was important to our department. It was important to our hospital, right? So our interests were all very much aligned. This is the clinical handbook for sickle cell disease vaso-occlusive crises or vaso-occlusive episodes for Ontario that came out in 2017. And there are a number of suggestions in this handbook for how to optimize care, including very clear targets about time to pain medications in the emergency department. And so based on that advice and on extensive discussions, our aim was to increase the number of people who are receiving opioid pain medications within 30 minutes of triage in the emergency department. And we started off looking at how many people were actually reaching that target already. And what we found was that in 2019, the vast majority of people were waiting much longer than 30 minutes to get pain medications. Only 5.6% of people were getting pain medications at less than 30 minutes from triage. And we wanted to know, was this universal for people coming in with pain to the emergency department, or was there something different that was happening for people living with sickle cell? And so we compared with folks that were coming in with pain due to renal colic. So another very painful condition, having bad kidney stones, not typically a life-threatening condition, so very different in that way from sickle cell. But we looked at the differences in time to pain medications. And so what you see in this chart is it's a run chart starting from January of 2019. Every dot there represents the median, so the sort of the middle time that it took to get pain medication. In blue for people with renal colic or kidney stones, in red for people with sickle cell. So looking at January 2019 to January 2020 to kind of get our baseline. And we'll come back to this. We took a quality improvement approach and started with a root cause analysis. So looking at the things that would help speed up getting pain medications and things that tended to slow things down. The things that tended to slow things down, not surprising in an emergency department that we had overworked and limited staff. There were also issues with obtaining intravenous access to be able to give medications in that way. And there were some gaps in terms of how people were being identified at triage as needing care. And so triage to a lower level than what was appropriate. We also saw two things that seemed to help get people pain medications in time. One was if people were getting pain medications before they were seen by an emergency physician. Now, we don't have at my hospital and in most sites in Ontario, we don't have the ability to have standing orders where a nurse is able to give opioid medications without a physician signing off. And so to me, when I see that someone's getting opioids before a physician is seen, that tells me that that's our nurses who are advocating for our patients. So that's the nurse at triage who's going to find a physician to say, hey, I know you haven't seen this person yet. Can you just please sign off on this pain medication so we can get things started? So not surprisingly, that seemed to make a big difference in the timing. The other thing that made a big difference was use of an order set. So we have for a number of years at my hospital had an order set that includes recommended doses for pain medications and suggested blood tests and when to do a chest x-ray, that sort of thing. It's optional to use the order set. When people use the order set, people got faster care. When they didn't, it was a little slower. And so we focused on the two things that tended to help. So that nurse advocacy piece and getting access to the order sets and making use of them. We did three things in the emergency department. They, in my mind, are fairly straightforward things that can be done in any department. These are not cost-intensive initiatives. The first was identifying and trying to address the fact that we were very separated from the sickle cell community. So just like Serena Thompson had said in the Canadian Medical Association Journal, she felt that her relationship with the emergency department was that there was no relationship. And so we tried to tackle that piece by piece by having community building events like the one that you see the poster for here, to give people the opportunity to talk to each other outside of the very high stress environment of the emergency department, to be able to hear each other's stories and get to know each other outside of those times of crises. We also adapted our order set and surprisingly for the first time with a patient warrior input. And so the order set now goes beyond doses of medications and suggested tests to include things like how important it is for folks to have access to distraction techniques, right? And so saying it's, if you see somebody who is having a sandwich or on their phone, it's not a sign that someone is not having pain. It could be a sign that they're actually trying to distract themselves and using strategies for managing pain that they've been learning over a lifetime of experiences. And so we've put that very explicitly into the order set along with that 30-minute target. And third, and I think most impactful, was patient and nurse-led education. So we had sickle cell warriors like Serena Thompson, like Marie Poku, like other members of our working group participate in education sessions in the emergency department to be able to give a firsthand account of what it's like to come to the emergency department when you're experiencing pain from sickle cell. And you can see in the mask, Nurse Ruth Appiah Boateng, who to me is the epitome of a healthcare champion, who has really been working tirelessly with the working group to ensure that our nurses get educated about sickle cell in order to be able to do the on-the-ground advocacy that needs to happen. So I'm going to bring us back to the chart I showed you at the beginning. So in blue, folks with renal colic and the time in minutes for them to get pain medications compared to in red, the folks with sickle cell. And this was from January 2019 to January 2020. And we looked after we started our interventions, and we were very encouraged to see this divide, right? So folks with renal colic, the time to pain medication stayed close to the same. And this is also before the start of the pandemic versus in the first year or two of the pandemic. And what we interpreted from this data was that even in the face of a pandemic, using fairly simple interventions, we could actually decrease the time to pain medications in the emergency department, which was very encouraging. And so we went from having only about 5% of people that were getting pain medications within 30 minutes to about 15%. So there was a threefold increase in the number of folks that were getting their pain medications in time. And so yay, we did it, but I say yay, we did it sort of, right? And so you also see in this chart that second red line that is trending right back up to where it was before, right? And that's to be expected with mainly educational-based intervention. But for us, it is a sign that we need to keep at it, right? That we need to go back. We've had a huge turnover in staff through the pandemic, so there is much more education that still has to happen. And there are other next steps that we want to take. We've got a new electronic patient record at our hospital, and we're looking forward to finding ways to leverage that to provide optimal care. We have increasing interest from our postgraduate colleagues, and so have 2 sessions dedicated for the future emergency physicians of Canada that are coming up this summer that we're encouraged about. And really the bottom line is that we are going to continue taking steps together. So listening to our sickle cell warriors, 2 of whom are here in the audience today who are part of the working group. And so Alvin and Euless, I'm very grateful for the contributions that you've made to the working group. And again, this is, I'm sharing the experience of our emergency department. We still have an awfully long way to go, but by working together, we can make emergency departments the kind of safe and welcoming spaces that we all need them to be. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, panélistes. On n'a pas beaucoup de temps. Et le micro, tu peux venir prendre le micro. S'il vous plaît, si vous avez des questions, vous pouvez les poser en français ou en anglais. Préférablement en anglais, apparemment, parce que nos panélistes, they are all anglophones.
On peut essayer en français aussi.
Oui, on peut traduire aussi. On va essayer de traduire. Oui, on a même quelqu'un pour traduire. Oui, derrière.
C'est lui qui va traduire.
Ah, OK, good. Parfait. Question? Don't be shy, please. OK.
Bonjour et bonjour à nos panélistes. Et je m'appelle Mamoudou Kamara. La question que j'aurais en fait, ça serait pour vous, mais vous pourrez aussi anticiper. C'est qu'on a parlé tout à l'heure des médicaments qui sont malheureusement pas encore homologués au Québec, au Canada, je veux dire. Et j'aimerais davantage en fait, premièrement, quelles sont les raisons de Santé Canada. Et j'ai aussi entendu, si on prend j'oublie le nom du médicament en question, mais je sais qu'il y avait le semblant qu'on a au Canada, mais qui n'a pas plus ou moins au niveau du coût. Alors, est-ce que c'est une question de coût, puisqu'on a le même médicament semblable, qui n'a pas la même fabrication? Donc, est-ce que c'est une raison qui fait que Santé Canada hésite à l'homologuer au Canada?
OK. Alors, je peux essayer de traduire en français ou est-ce que...
Je suis là, oui.
Okay,
oui.
Merci.
Donc, on va juste établir quelque chose pour la traduction. Quand vous parlez, vous devez arrêter au milieu de ce que vous dites. Si vous faites 12 phrases, je fais un résumé. Un résumé, ce n'est pas bon pour personne. Mais si vous prenez une pause, je traduis et ensuite vous continuez et je traduis. Maintenant, je répète tout ce que vous avez dit. Vous voyez la différence? Donc, c'est très important. Donc, est-ce qu'on peut commencer avec la première question que tu as eue? Parce que je crois que j'ai entendu 2 questions. Quelle était la première question?
Quelles sont les raisons que ces médicaments ne sont pas homologués par Santé Canada?
So, what are the reasons that Health Canada has not taken those medications here and they're not available?
Right. And so, there are a number of reasons. So most recently, COVID and the pandemic was given as a reason why COVID-related vaccines and medications were prioritized. However,
donc, par exemple, à cause de la COVID, il y a eu beaucoup de difficultés à avoir des nouveaux médicaments. Donc, à cause de la COVID, plusieurs médicaments qu'on aurait pu avoir ici ne pouvaient pas être disponibles.
Okay, thank you. However, part of the reality is that some of these medications were approved long before the COVID pandemic happened. They were approved in the United States.
Et pourtant, la vérité est que ces médicaments, plusieurs d'entre eux, ont été approuvés bien avant la COVID, il y a bien longtemps, et étaient déjà disponibles.
And I think some of the reasons we've touched on through the various presentations this morning where, sickle cell disease is invisible to many people because of a lack of awareness, but also because of the way the symptoms manifest. And in terms of the community that's affected, this tends to be racialized and marginalized individuals. So for advocacy, it's limited.
Donc, c'est pour ça qu'on disait que d'avoir la sensibilisation et aussi de militer pour l'anémie falciforme, c'est très important parce que le fait que cette maladie est entre parenthèses invisible fait que beaucoup de choses qui auraient pu être faites ne sont pas encore faites pour l'anémie falciforme.
Mm-hmm. So steps, sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay. I was just going to add one more thing. I was just going to say that, some of what Dr. Pakale and Biba and Dr. Brian were talking about today is you need numbers and data. So in Canada, for example, when we talk about the impact of anti-Black racism on healthcare, one of the arguments is that we don't have data. If you don't count it, you can't see it. Right? So similarly with sickle cell disease, we need to have data to show our numbers, the needs, and the gaps so that we can better serve our patients.
Et pour l'anémie falciforme, on l'a déjà dit précédemment, c'est très important qu'on ait des données.
Et avec ces données, on pourra demander, exiger et avoir des changements. Donc, par exemple, si on parle de racisme aussi, qui est un élément bien important dans cette équation de changement pour l'anémie falciforme, si on a des données sur ce qui se passe, on peut dire voici pourquoi on veut des changements, voici pourquoi on doit avancer.
Yeah, thank you. All those are very important points. I just wanted to add something related to cystic fibrosis again. All these drugs are very expensive when they come new and improved. But around the similar time, the magic pill I was talking about for cystic fibrosis was approved, and not just approved, it is available for the patients in the clinic today. And it is very expensive, like one tablet costing more than 10,000, one tablet. And so we are approving the drugs for similar kind of disease, which is rare and inherited, which is also expensive drug. And at the same time, we do not have approval for drugs which are actually less expensive for a disease like sickle cell. So all those issues we talked about, the racism, the discrimination. So we need more political will and people like our senator, and we need more patients' voices and organizations like BIBAS and more to make that heard, and lobbying efforts so that we get those approvals, because there is otherwise no good reason for not to have them in Canada today.
Donc, je vais essayer de faire un résumé, malheureusement. Mais, il n'y a, par exemple, pour la fibrose kystique, les médicaments sont déjà disponibles. Ce sont pourtant des médicaments très dispendieux, mais non seulement ils sont approuvés, ils sont disponibles avec le gouvernement. Et ces médicaments ont été approuvés à des époques où l'anémie falciforme aurait pu être déjà approuvée. Et de plus, les médicaments pour l'anémie falciforme sont bien moins dispendieux et pourtant, on n'a rien. Donc, c'est le temps vraiment de se mobiliser, de faire passer des lois et de demander des changements.
Oh, hi. Okay. So thanks for the presentation. Pretty good talks. The question I have is, with the government having the rare disease strategy, I think this question is applicable to everyone. Like, what are your thoughts on, because we've talked about limited resourcing and funding for sickle cell compared to cystic fibrosis. Like, what are your thoughts on what the community can do to ensure that some of the funding from the rare disease strategy is actually applied for sickle cell? So to the registry, to work in the ER, to getting, better care for the community. Like, what are your thoughts on, and what are some ways we could, as a community, ensure that some funding gets into sickle cell?
Okay, so I'll take a stab at that question. It's an excellent question. And I think, it has to be that we're at the table, that representatives from the sickle cell community, whether it will be leaders from advocacy groups, clinicians, patients, caregivers, allies, they have to be at the table when decisions are being made about how the money should be spent. Data is important, but clearly, having strong advocates who make the condition visible is really important. And so I think what we're seeing today, having people in politics like our senator invited to meetings like this, helps to create that knowledge and awareness. So perhaps we need to invite individuals who have impact or influence on how that money is spent to be able to tell them the stories, to share the life experience. And I'm sorry, you have to translate.
No, I will translate only for the people who speak French. We're fine.
Right. Okay. All right. So everybody speaks English, presumably. But anyways, just to say, we have to make sure that everybody who has a voice, or that we have a voice at the table, and that the people who make the decisions are aware of us and know that we also matter.
Yes. On prend une dernière ou avant-dernière question parce qu'on a déjà largement retard.
Oui, bonjour. Nous sommes des cliniciens à la cité collégiale, donc on travaille avec des étudiants. Et puis, j'ai 3 questions.
So we are at la Cité collégiale and we work with students, and I have 3 questions.
Ma première question, c'est de savoir, comme M. Guerrier parlait du protocole, du fait qu'on le faisait partir venir, est-ce que vous avez des collaborations avec certaines cliniques ou des centres de santé qui sont sensibilisés à l'anémie falciforme?
So do you have collaboration with clinics and centers who are aware of sickle cell disease so that there's changes in how patients are seen and treated?
Okay, ça c'est la première.
So that's the first question.
À Ottawa ou oui, à Ottawa? Okay. La deuxième, c'est est-ce que vous avez encore des ressources pour ces personnes-là, parce qu'il y a une sensibilisation qui doit se faire, étant donné qu'il y a beaucoup de personnes qui ne savent pas. Moi, personnellement, je sais que je l'appelle drépanocytose. Le mot de l'anémie falciforme, c'est un peu nouveau. Donc, est-ce que vous avez des ressources pour pouvoir envoyer ces étudiants-là quand ils sont, par exemple, en crise, sans toutefois être balancés?
And do you have resources for students about sickle cell disease so that they can manage better and get better service, get better with their treatments? And she says also, I'm also puzzled with your word in French, anémie falciforme, because in Europe we call it drépanocytose, and we understand what that is. And when we hear anémie falciforme, we could be confused. So this is another comment she made during the question.
Et puis la dernière, c'est aussi pour les familles, parce que on s'occupe beaucoup d'étudiants, mais il y a aussi des étudiants internationaux qui arrivent et puis qui ne savent pas où aller. Est-ce qu'il y a une sensibilisation qu'on peut faire à ces étudiants-là? Et puis, qu'est-ce qu'on peut mettre en place pour eux dans nos écoles pour pouvoir les aider?
So I would like to know what can be put in place for students to help them, because those students who have sickle cell disease come, and what about them or their families?
Dr. Viva va nous aider aussi, elle va être panéliste entre-temps. Mais vous pouvez aller, if you can also answer to that.
I will add just a little tiny bit before Biba, because I don't want to follow Biba, because I know Biba's answer is going to be phenomenal.
Je vais ajouter un petit détail avant que Biba parle.
So what I can say from my narrow scope of experience, so within the emergency department, I'm very fortunate that we're connected with the red blood cell disorders clinic at my same hospital. Part of I'll stop there and then say more.
Okay, donc je suis contente que au service d'urgence où je travaille, nous sommes reliés avec le centre. What center is that?
So University Health Network.
Donc nous sommes reliés avec les services de santé d'université, le réseau de santé des universités.
Part of our protocol in the emergency department is that if someone is not connected with that clinic, that we send a referral so they can get connected.
Donc, on a dans notre protocole que si quelqu'un ne connaît pas ce réseau, il n'est pas connecté avec lui, on les met en contact pour qu'ils deviennent au courant.
But I would say the most important thing that I share with sickle cell warriors that I see in the emergency department is information about the Sickle Cell Disease Association of Canada and about the Sickle Cell Awareness Group of Ontario and the Sickle Cell Association of Ontario. So being connected in the community, an incredibly powerful way to be able to advocate for yourself and your family.
Et lorsque je rencontre des patients, je les informe des associations en Ontario, des associations canadiennes, et il y a aussi une association au Québec. Donc, on informe les gens des associations qui existent pour qu'ils aient un lien et du support.
And then I will happily turn.
Et maintenant, on va laisser la parole à Viva.
Exactly. Thank you. Exactly. That's what I was going to say, that I think the schools should connect with the patient group, because we have some materials that we can share to, educate about sickle cell, but most importantly, to tell them on how to proceed to get care here, because they're international students and it might be different for them when they're not Canadian. Our healthcare system, is different. And we've been contacted recently by many schools telling us that the students don't have the appropriate insurance and they find themselves with like heavy bills. And this is going to create another problem in our community again, where they're going to be stigmatized, they're going to be left out, and they're going to even start refusing visa for them to come and study here. So we have to work together. We have, I think Quebec has a booklet for teachers also. Do you have it here today, Daniel? I don't know. Yes, and oh yes, this one is from Ontario, Sickle Cell and School, a guide to school policy and best practices. So you should get copies of this and you should connect. Recently, I was contacted by the school board in Quebec, and I start meeting with them, and we are creating a teaching program for teachers to know what to do and to know how to guide the student and send them. So yeah, okay.
C'est bon? Okay.
I can,
Yeah, the first question was about the comprehensive multidisciplinary clinical programs, and we do not have them. They are non-existent. We are trying to create them, in collaboration with the pediatric hospitals in Ottawa, but multiple places, I know they do not have the multidisciplinary clinics like cystic fibrosis.
Et donc, je voulais commenter que les cliniques multidisciplinaires avec des équipes composées de plusieurs professionnels n'existent pratiquement pas. Donc, ce sont des choses à bâtir et à faire ici.
And about the advocacy, I wanted to say we should not be putting all the onus on the people living with sickle cell and their families, because I shared one statistics from Ontario that more than 80% people come from the lowest socioeconomic strata. They already have so many challenges day to day of survival, and they do not have that free time to do the lobbying and sitting in the meetings, and hence we need the allyship. We need to create allyship.
Et j'aimerais mentionner qu'on ne doit pas mettre tout le fardeau de la responsabilité de militer sur les gens qui ont la maladie, sur leur famille. Et j'ai mentionné comme statistique que 80% des gens qui ont la difficulté avec l'anémie falciforme ne sont pas socio-économiquement riches. Donc, les gens n'ont pas le temps de s'asseoir dans des réunions et de cogner aux portes et de faire des téléphones. Donc, tout le monde doit être impliqué, pas seulement ceux qui sont dans le besoin.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment about the Ottawa question, this Ottawa specific question you had, there are 2 clinics that I know of where they're family health teams, where they have a particular interest in caring for adults and families with sickle cell. So there's the Reform Clinic, which is on Bronson, I believe. And then there's also the Somerset West Community Health Clinic, where they have newcomers clinic as well, but they also have individuals who are interested in caring for patients who have sickle cell disease. Another resource that you can look at to see or to ask about physicians who have an interest in sickle cell disease is the Black Physicians Association of Ontario. They do have a communication where you can request either.
Est-ce que vous pouvez répéter le nom des cliniques tout plus doucement pour que je puisse traduire? Oui.
Somerset Street West Community Health Clinic.
Donc, il y a une clinique sur Somerset que vous pouviez chercher.
A Reform Health Clinic. I think
Et une autre qui s'appelle the Reform Health Clinic. Et vous mentioned a third one, right?
I was going to say, and this is for all of Ontario, there's the Black Physician Association of Ontario, which is a network of Black physicians in Ontario. And they do have a resource if you're interested in finding a physician who happens to be Black or a physician who has an interest in sickle cell, for example. You can also contact
Donc, il y a le réseau des médecins noirs de l'Ontario qui peut être une autre ressource à consulter.
Yeah. And then just one other comment on the drépanocytose versus anémie falciforme. So yeah, so thank you for making that point. It is confusing. More and more, I know in Europe, they're moving away from drépanocytose to use, as we do in English, maladie falciforme, so sickle cell disease, because not everyone who has sickle cell disease has anemia, but you do hear that the 2 terms are used interchangeably.
Donc, c'est bon? Pour cela, merci.
Oui, okay.
Bien, on va vous dire merci et big applause to our 3 panelists.
Et merci à nos panélistes.
Oui, on va prendre un break de 5 minutes. Vous pouvez amener votre café à l'intérieur pour qu'on ne puisse pas interrompre le début du panel suivant.
Je voudrais juste annoncer qu'on a du café éthiopien aujourd'hui ici. Alors, on a Mentwab qui est là, qui est une maman qui va nous faire goûter du café éthiopien aujourd'hui. Alors, profitez-en et vous pouvez même en acheter. Elle en a déjà ici, puis ça va entre de 10 à 20 $. C'est pas cher. Alors, supportez un peu sa business. Merci.
So important, we will take 5 minutes break. Bring your coffee, please, because we are very late. Really 5-minute break.
We had joked that I would do the other job.